Dr. Wainer, he was getting a lot of publicity, and he happened to say at one time that I think probably on Four Corners that of course it was the abortions were rife in Sydney, and the cops were getting money from it, and of course it got quite surreal then when Alan, who was getting the money from the abortions, challenged Dr. Wainer to come up to Sydney and tell him all about these terrible things that were happening. And so I was, as I say, I was Bert's running dog, and he asked me to come up to Sydney with him, and he was nervous that he would get shot at the airport, and so he asked me to stand in front of him. And so I asked a pal of mine named Bruce Hanford to stand in front of me, so that whoever got shot, Bert was the least likely, and I was the second least likely, or whatever. Anyway, it really did get surreal. Dr. Wainer had an appointment to talk at 2GB, and he rang up Alan, and he said he wouldn't go. Alan wanted him to go to police headquarters, and he said he wouldn't go to police headquarters on the ground that if he was going to get clipped, then that'd be the place to do it. Although he thought he was going to get clipped at the airport, so he came up by a light plane. Didn't come by the commercial airport, and the cops were out at the airport waiting for him. Whether they had guns or not, I don't know. In any event, Bert said he wouldn't go and see Alan at police headquarters, and Alan said, well, I'm not going to come over and talk to you there, but I'll send somebody over. And he sent Ferguson over to ask Bert about about cops getting money from abortions. It's weird. And he sent with him a guy called Noel Morey, and and also Roger Rogerson. I don't assume they were in the abortion ring and getting money from it, but I assume that Morey and Rogerson were just sent over to put the frighteners on us. Anyway, so here's Wainer refuses to talk to Ferguson and the other two, except with other people, meaning Hanford and me. So it just got silly by the moment. So we go into the boardroom, and they're there, and we sit down opposite them, and I put a tape recorder on the table, recording to hear this nonsense. And Rogerson was the smartest of them, I figured, because he was the first guy to recognise, and it took him about 10 minutes to realise that there was a tape recorder recording this chatter. And Ferguson said, well, I'm not going to question you to Dr. Wainer in the presence of these people, reporters. Wainer said, well, in any event, what could I tell you, Superintendent, about people getting money for abortion? So, it was just a bit of nonsense. And Bert asked me to talk to the press, and the press guy said, what happened in there? And I said, well, Superintendent Ferguson would not take evidence from Dr. Wainer in the presence of witnesses. So I said that I thought Bert's idea that he was going to get killed was, I was a simple lad from the sticks. I didn't believe that sort of thing would happen, but I was proved wrong about that 7 months later, when, if you remember, this was in 1969, and at that time there was no heroin in Sydney until the American soldiers on leave from Vietnam brought it in the 60s. And at that point, there was a division in the police force. There were those cops like Ferguson, Don Ferguson, who believed in what was called the clean quid. there were some cops believed that there was such a thing as a clean quid, that is to say the money you got from extorting bribes from working girls and illegal gamblers and people who were doing abortions. That was regarded as the clean quid. Whereas the money you got from extorting from people who were running drugs, that was the dirty quid. And Ferguson didn't agree with it. And Kelly and Krahe, and particularly Krahe, wanted to get into the dirty quid, into the drug squid, and Ferguson was an obstacle to it. He wouldn't stand for it. So they have weird sets of ethics, these guys, and so I think the strongest view is that Krahe murdered Ferguson in police headquarters, where Bert sensibly didn't go, 7 months after Bert was there. He murdered him in the lavatory in police headquarters. And Krahe was a guy who had the runs on the board. It's also believed that he went up to Brisbane and murdered Shirley Briffman because she was talking about the corruption in Sydney. And it's also believed that he murdered Don Mackay, the guy who was talking about the drugs or the marijuana plantations out at Griffith. And the best view on those marijuana plantations were that they were so huge, the one at Collyamberley was so huge, that it could not have been used to supply the people who used marijuana in Australia. It had to be for overseas consumption. So it was a big export thing and a huge thing. And they got someone to kill Mackay, and a fellow called Jim Baisley went to jail for it. But the best view, I think, is that it was Krahe who did it.